This is the new all singing, all dancing, may not sing or dance, Mercedes-Benz X-Class pickup truck. The question is, how does it, thank you very much, compare to the pickup establishment, such as the Toyota Hilux, Mitsubishi L200, Volkswagen Amarok and Ford Ranger? Now please like and subscribe, because they said they wouldn't let me down until I had asked you to do just that.
So we are going to put these cars through 3 challenges, the first of which is a lap of our benchmark disused quarry that you'll have seen in other videos. Now that's to test the ride quality when loaded with 250 kilograms of ballast in the back of these cars, as well as assess how well they cope with some off-road challenges. First up then is the new contender, the Mercedes-Benz X-Class.
Okay, so the X-Class, as you may be aware, is Mercedes' first kind of pickup thing, but for that reason they based it on the Nissan Navara. It's got a slightly strengthened chassis to cope with the fact that they do a 350 model, which is a 6-cylinder engine. But this is not it. This is the X250D.
This variant then has 187 horsepower and a payload of 1,066 kilograms. It'll tow 3.5 tons.
Just going over some moguls now. It rides firmly enough with nothing in the back. It rides a bit more supplely by the time I chuck in 250 kilograms of sand and gravel. The interior is pleasant. Mercedes, when they approached this, they said, well, you know, there are lots of pickups that do the off-road load carrying thing and people use them every day, but wouldn't it be nice to have one of those cars which is actually quite pleasant and classy inside? So this is one of the more expensive pickups. This one is 34 grand in the UK, including VAT. A lot of people won't pay that. It has part-time four-wheel drive with low ratio. Some of the interior, shuddered over that a bit, some of the interior elements come from the V-Class van, but it's built on the Nissan Navara line. Crikey. It's not the easiest thing in the world to place. It's quite a high window line, and you just see bulge of bonnet. The engine's very quiet though. Can you hear it? I barely can.
The turning circle is not bad. Lock to lock, it is about 3.5 turns, which would be slow for a typical Mercedes, but not slow for a big pickup truck.
It just grounds ever so slightly over these moguls. We'll see how other cars get on versus that in terms of approach, departure, yada 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 angles. Does it feel like a Mercedes? I think that's the thing. In terms of the interior feel, the infotainment system, yes, it does, but there are things that give it away. You know, the very old school, old-fashioned big gear lever, the fact it's got so many turns, locks a lock, and you know, it feels like a pickup truck. As the person who swapped it with me yesterday said, it's pretty crude, mate. Well, it is, but such is a car that can tow 3.5 tons and has a ton load in the back and can fit 5 people back there. So I'm in low ratio. That was pretty easy. Stick it in neutral, electronically switch it.
This is an unusual pickup in that it's got multi-link rear suspension. Now it still has a live axle, but most trucks like this have leaf springs.
That makes them more rugged, typically. But the Navara and hence the X-Class does not. It went over the big thing we think some of the cars might ground on quite nicely. On full lock it grinds a bit in low ratio. That's not surprising. The centre diff is locked. Am I impressed? Reasonably. But the truth will come when we try something else. It's like cricket. There's no good telling just after the first innings. You'll find out once somebody else has batted too.
And next into bat is the Ford Ranger, which is one of the lower powered trucks here with just 158 horsepower and 284 pounds-foot. But it's also one of the cheapest.
But things are competitive. It doesn't ride too badly with the stuff in the back, but just is scrabbling over the moguls quite a lot of smoke coming out the back, well, dust coming out the back. Turning circle is good, steering is light. I like the steering actually. Does steer very nicely, very consistently. Ford tends to try and put the same kind of feel into all of its vehicles, whether that's a Fiesta or Mondeo or even, I guess, a Ranger. One of the more dynamic cars to drive. It's got 2.2 litre 4-cylinder engine, 1080 kilo payload. You can tow 3.5 tons with it. In this limited version, it's got the sort of touch screeny thing in the middle. I think the engine's fairly refined, as you would expect a low-ish powered 2.2 diesel to be. Come on, just creep it through. Creep it through, creep it through, creep it through. There we go. A sort of long throttle pedal for creeping around.
How's the turning circle? Well, the Ranger's rack is 4 turns lock to lock, but it's actually got quite a good turning circle, so the steering doesn't feel too slow.
It's easy to place. I wonder if the visibility's better. It doesn't feel like it's got quite as much girth to it as, say, the X-Class or the Amarok. It's actually quite a relaxing thing to drive, and I don't think it rides too badly. I need neutral. And then via electronic switch, shift to 4x4, low in progress, done. It's pretty quick. Let's see if it will go over the mogul. Oh, I feel like it changed down a gear for me then, but it's a really easy progressive power delivery. Piece of cake. Piece of actual cake. Wouldn't mind a piece of actual cake. And thus ends the Ranger's off-road test. And so then to the Mitsubishi L200, whose steering is quite vague. But it feels fairly narrow, actually, compared to some of the others. And over the moguls. Hello? Hello? Oh. Is there any chance of just, you know... I've got the centre diff locked, and the ESC will not get me over. I'm gonna have to attack this again. That's weird. The stability control on these things, you know, the ABS, effectively you use the same circuit. When you've got an open differential and you can't lock it, what you rely on is the ESC braking one wheel, because otherwise the wheel just spins. So it brakes that wheel, power goes to a wheel that has grip, you get over your moguls. These are not big moguls, and everything else has got over. The Ranger spun its tyres a bit. Well, this time it has got over with a thump, and then another thump as it goes. And that was with the centre diff locked as well. It made a bit of a meal of things, didn't it, there, I thought?
The L200 finds itself in the middle of the pack in terms of both outputs, producing 179 horsepower and 317 pound-foot of torque, and in terms of price, because it costs £32,700.
So it's a bit weird. This has got the most claustrophobic cabin. The fit and finish is all right for one of these. The infotainment system is quite complicated. And the ride feels quite well controlled, actually, with our test ballast in the back. Let's see. Oh, it's like, turning circle's pretty good, I think. There's a bit of self-centering to the steering. It's not as precise as the Ranger when it comes to this kind of driving. Visibility's okay, but at least it doesn't feel as large as the X-Class. I don't know if it is, it just doesn't feel it.
A bit like city cars, all of these trucks are within smidgens of each other. When we do a city car group test, the difference between, say, the shortest and the longest is a matter of millimetres. The difference between the cheapest and the most expensive is a few quid or even less than that. And the same is true of cars like these that are bought so much on how much they cost you to run.
It gets over around a very steep corner very easily. Is it going to scrape? It's going to scrape that tow bar a lot. Oh, and I know it's got a tow bar on it. If you want maximum departure angle, don't have a tow bar. But that scrapes more than the X-Class's tow bar, doing the same thing. Oh, but it's fine, this car. It's fine. But it's in a realm where there are cars that do it better. A Ranger rides a bit better, is a bit quieter. The X-Class does, well, everything that we've tested so far does that initial mogul better. Right, I'm in 4 low. I have my centre diff locked. I've got 2 high, 4 high, 4 high with centre diff, 4 low with centre diff. And thus far, I've had the centre diff locked all the time. But the fact that it wouldn't go over those initial moguls without a run-up, slightly worrying. Gets to the top of the ramp easily. It's got a nice throttle response, to be fair. It's got a nice, easy throttle progression. Doesn't graunch on the way over. And then on full lock on the way out, you get a little bit of complaining from that centre differential.
Next up is the Volkswagen Amarok, the only car here with a manual gearbox, but we won't hold that against it because you can get an auto. It's also the only car here with a V6 engine.
Rather than a 4-cylinder engine. I did ask a Volkswagen engineer why they did that. Why fit a V6? Because we wanted to, was the answer. Fair enough. Right, I'm in 4 high. It has breezed over the first part of the moguls. Didn't quite breeze over the end of it, but it got there in the end. 1 over on the L200 there, but it didn't quite breeze it as easily as some of the other cars. I'm just going to drive it round, basically feet off everything in first, until I get to the bit where I need low range, if possible. It's really comfortable, actually. It's not Volkswagen Phaeton, but compared to the other stuff here, it takes the edge off the ride. It's quiet, it's really quiet in here. And the interior quality feels Volkswagen-esque. Yeah, right, material, texture and stuff itself is not as good. It gets a bit hard on the bottom surfaces. This is one of the more expensive cars here, but if you are looking for the vehicle that does everything, one, I think it's the best looking. Two, it's probably the nicest inside.
This is the 163 horsepower version. You can have up to 255 horsepower. It can carry over a ton in the load bay and tow more than 3 tons, but not quite the full 3.5.
Smooth sounding engine, isn't it? That's a nice sounding, powerful, powerboaty type of noise, rather than just a big 2.4 4-cylinder going bang, 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 bang. It's a really smooth, cultured noise. If you're looking for one that will impress you as a car, this is the one. Right, 4x4 low. Let's find out how it deals with the hill. Ooh, low range is low. It sounds good. It sounds really nice. Got to keep a little bit of power on. Yeah, breakover's fine. Even though it's got big side steps on it, so it looks the bee's knees. Oh, and low range is very low. Crawls down there and in first has a crawler gear. Really nicely. Really, really sedately. This is arguably the most impressive of the bunch so far.
And finally to the Toyota Hilux,
which you may have seen on your television screen in the news with somebody standing in the back with a machine gun. It is the vehicle of choice throughout a lot of the world. This is an auto, it's a 2.4 diesel 4-cylinder, less power than anything else at 150, but it's got a decent amount of torque. It has low ratio, which I've had to select because I want to lock the rear diff. And I can't lock the rear diff if I'm in 4 high. But as a result, it breezes over remarkably easily. And the turning circle is okay.
It's got a curious sort of interior in that it's not that car-like, but it is quite Toyota-ish in how it looks unusual and the interior materials are quite scratchy.
But then this is one of the more affordable of these vehicles. The ride's a little bit bouncier than the Volkswagen particularly, but it feels relatively compact. It's got more than a ton payload, but it'll only tow 3.2 tons rather than 3.5. Does that matter? It might to you, I guess. But it's easy to place. The steering is very consistently weighted. It's not a light steering rack by any means. It's a sort of medium weight, medium precision. Rides better than an L200.
It's one of those cars that does everything reasonably well.
If you want the most refined car-like pickup, this is not the one for you, but doesn't quite feel like it's got the same level of suppleness as the Volkswagen. But these cars are all sort of drifting into one another. L200 aside, which I think very obviously sits nearer the bottom. The Amarok for me sits at the top, and then there's this kind of sort of middle ground of this, the Ford and the Mercedes, where which you would go for might depend as much on how much they cost as anything that one does better or worse than the other. I did that pretty quietly and easily. Which would I rather have? Probably this over an X-Class.
Now we had to start narrowing the trucks down, so we picked a top 3 to send through to round 2. The L200 was eliminated as it refused to go across the smaller moguls on its first run, and the Ranger was left behind because the X-Class is a bit nicer to sit in and performed slightly better off-road.
So that elimination leaves 3 cars left over. The Volkswagen Amarok, the Mercedes-Benz X-Class and the Toyota Hilux. Which brings us to challenge 2, which involves another pickup truck, somewhere between 6 and 10 tons of Unimog.
Now we've coned out a few metres over which the winner will heave the Unimog across the line in the shortest amount of time. First up it's the Hilux, which doesn't have a tow bar, so we've had to carefully attach the Unimog to its chassis.
Got a tame truck driver in the Mog ready to stop it so it doesn't run into the back of the car. So it's all done so that we don't break anything. Because you and I, we've all seen stuff where things go terribly wrong on the internet. Right, I am ready. Simon is ready. 3, 2, 1.
The Hilux drags the Mog over the line in 8.38 seconds, laying down a marker for the Volkswagen Amarok to take on next.
I'm going to be a bit gentle on the getaway because this is a manual.
The Amarok doesn't get away from the line as cleanly as the Toyota, and it crosses the finishing line in 9.93 seconds, more than a second and a half shy of the Hilux. and the X-Class comes in the slowest of the three with a time of 10.55 seconds. The Amarok is slightly hampered in this test by being a manual rather than an auto, but it's a really good pickup, feeling classy inside and being an excellent all-rounder. The X-Class is a decent pickup, but not ultimately a great Mercedes. Now, obviously, we don't only decide a winner on the basis of which can tow a Unimog the fastest. In terms of its size, its price and its ability, the Hilux is everything a working pickup should be.
Okay, so the Toyota Hilux to your left, my right, is the winner, which means it faces the big one, the Unimog. Actually, this is the small one. This is as small as Mogs get. It's the U218, which means it has a meagre 5.1 litre four-cylinder engine in the front, driving all four wheels. Only makes about 175 horsepower, but it also makes 550 foot-pounds of torque. But it's what you can do to the Unimog chassis, which alone weighs 6 tonnes, all in it weighs about 10, evenly distributed, that makes it special. So, for example, this one has a power takeoff at the front, which means you can do boring things with it, like attach a mower or a thing that cleans the inside of tunnels, or tree surgeons use them, things like that. The Belgian army put machine guns in them, which is excellent. It's the whole versatility of them that is the really special thing, and also they're very low geared. They've got 8 forward speeds, 6 reverse speeds, but we'll take a look inside and I'll show you exactly what it does. Right, so what does your 75 or about 100 grand in this spec gets you? You've got pretty comfy plush seats, and what you will notice is this vast array of switches and a big lever. This has got a tipper bed, but you could put a cherry picker on it, or you could put all kinds of things on it. Now, this has got a pre-selected gearbox, so if I turn it on, it is not the world's quietest vehicle, as you will understand. Currently in neutral, but if I were to flick it forwards into drive, wait for a click, there it goes, that means it's in drive. If I lift off the clutch, away we'll go. Stick it back in neutral. Now, I'm right-hand drive at the moment. That's fine for driving on the road, but say I'm following a combine harvester, I'm on the left-hand side of it, and I want to see what it's tipping in the back. Quite simply, I pull off that, and I can convert it into left-hand drive in less than a minute. How wicked is that? Ultimately, it's basically the coolest machine on the planet, especially if you get it in this kind of Porsche Miami blue, which I rather like. Today, we're going to use it for something that it's not specifically designed for. It is an off-roader, but we're going to use it as a kind of end-of-level baddie against the Toyota, where we're going to do a rock crawl in this versus that, which means I need to get rid of the stuff in the back of it. I've got my Sherpas outside showing me what to do. So it does feel a little bit precarious. I'm in first of 8 gears. This is just purely, that's purely on letting the clutch out on idle. Oh, they're looking more interested now. That's amazing. And it just goes up anything. It's quite a long drop to my left, so I'll just make sure I keep an eye on that. There. Oh, I'll get a thumbs up. I'll take that. I'll go second. On the outside of this, there are sort of power takeoffs and hydraulic takeoffs everywhere. There's an air line that you can blow the radiator out with, and in fact the radiator on the side, if say you've got a mower on the side and the radiator is sucking air and grass into it, you can reverse the fan and it blows it out instead. There are cameras front and rear. I think I've got a front camera at the moment showing.
The Unimog is not the world's easiest vehicle to creep along really slowly, just because its clutch pedal is really hard to modulate.
They do an automatic version, a full auto version. They do a mega off-road version as well, which has got jacked up suspension, bigger wheels and tyres. Mercedes sells around 100 in the UK, dead straight, yeah, dead straight, a year.
The brakes are also a bit grabby, and because the cabin is so high and situated so far forwards on the chassis, the sensation is slightly terrifying, feeling as if you might flip over forwards, even though at 10 tonnes and with all of that fairly low down, that is very, very unlikely.
Bells. And as well as there's the articulation, of which there is enough, the chassis is designed so that it actually twists slightly as well, so it increases the axle articulation that way. Ground clearance is strong because the differential, which is offset to one side or another, there are live axles front and rear, but to gain more ground clearance, the axle sits above the centre line of the wheel, and then there is a gearbox each side underneath the axle. These lads look very confident from the outside. It feels rather precarious from in here. I mean, if it does fall off these rocks and fall down to the left, it would keep going for several minutes. Set them running. Yeah, yeah. Well, that feels among the most terrifying things I've ever done in a motorised vehicle.
Let's see how the Hilux gets on.
Now, this is not really strictly the remit of a pickup truck, but I think it's a worthy test, and we're going to see how far it gets, see how good as a percentage it is compared to the Unimog. The pedals are much easier to modulate. There's creep when you lift off straight away, obviously, which helps, even more so in low ratio. Haven't got much less power than the Unimog. You do have rather a lot less torque, rather a lot less weight as well, and not quite such low gearing. But I'm making quicker progress already, I think. To be fair, just lift off the brakes, and that is overcoming. Oh, stop! That is overcoming rocks just on creep. I'm not putting any throttle on, so that's just on idle. It's just creeping forward on idle. Doing rather well. There's a little bit of consternation outside at the moment, I'm afraid. Simon's doing that, which is the universal sign for you're going to break it if you carry on. This car also has a conventional handbrake, so it's quite a smooth vehicle. So that was nice. Just slowly.
For a long car, the Hilux copes rather admirably over the rock crawl with good axle articulation and a pretty high ground clearance.
This is going well. How would the other pickups get on? I think probably fine. It's easier to turn the wheels when they're up against a rock than it is in the Mog, but that is no great surprise given the size of the wheels on the Unimog, the weight of the wheel, the weight of the chassis against them. You can get a Unimog where you can remotely lower and raise the tyre pressures from inside the cab. That doesn't have it, but it does have an airline, so you can just let the tyres down if you want to and pump them back up.
What does it better? Maybe a Jeep Wrangler, maybe the short wheelbase Toyota Land Cruiser, but those things aside, the Hilux is as impressive a car as we've come across.
Bear in mind that the Hilux is 30-something thousand pounds before options, not 75 before options plus VAT. I'm seriously impressed. In conclusion, our winners are machines that both look equally at home with a machine gun in the back of them. The Unimog is fantastic. Actually, though, I'm very impressed with the way the Toyota Hilux managed the rock crawl. I suspect any of them would have got over eventually one way or another, but I'm pretty comfortable saying that if you want the world's best pickup truck, you should buy a Toyota Hilux. If you like this nonsense, please don't forget to up thumb and subscribe. We're here on YouTube every week. We're on autocar.co.uk all the time, and we're in all good newsagents and some rubbish ones every Wednesday.